Hello, spooky friends, and welcome to another episode of the Scariest Podcast.
Woo! I'm so happy to be here. How about you?
Yeah, super happy.
Yeah, this was the most research I've ever done before an episode.
Really?
So, yeah, and it's mainly because I spent 2 to 3 hours researching a topic that I wound up not using because I found it to be unreliable and basically horseshit. So I'm pretty annoyed about that. But I'm really, really happy to be here. How about you?
Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
I think I already said that, didn't I?
Yeah, you already did say that,
right
you
on.
weirdo.
So who are we?
I'm Robin Grace, and you're Adam Diaz. And
Cool, thank you. So you happy to be here?
I'm done talking to you now. Okay, so we're going to start off today's episode with some homegrown horror as usual, which is stories that you guys have taken the time out of your day to write and send to us and share about your weird, creepy experiences or sleep paralysis episodes or just strange things that have happened to you. So
yeah, and we appreciate you guys sharing whatever you choose to share with us. And if you decide that you want to do so after hearing some of these, or if you've sent us something before and you're like, oh yeah, I need to follow up on that, please email storytime@scaryish.com. You can also go to facebook.com/scaryish podcast. That is our Facebook page. You can like the page and message us from there, or you can go to the group, join the group, and post for some instant feedback from the community. You can also join the Discord if you'd like to post there, or just join the Discord for funsies because we do a lot of talking there in general. And you can go to the Facebook page and find that as well. If you want to tweet at us, it's @ScarishPod. That's only 280 characters, so it's usually just a shout out or a topic suggestion. Or you can let us know if you purchase one of our t-shirts.
Yeah.
Which we are here to tell you now is only going to be available until August 31st. We originally said it was going to be until September 5th because the original plan was to run it for a full month, but it looks like at the end of the calendar month is when the shirt will be deactivated, and is the only time we're going to run the Scarish logo with the I was first
thing, yeah,
underneath it. So to those of you who have bought one, thank you so much, and to those of you who have been waiting to buy one, now is the time to do so. We will hopefully have a merchandise shop opening up very soon following that being brought down, but thank you again to everyone who has contributed. But let's go ahead and get on with homegrown horror. So you're going to go first?
I'll go first because mine's really short.
Cool.
So this one goes, hi again, guys. I'm listening to the podcast now, and Robin mentioned she wanted more stories about imaginary friends, and it reminded me of something really freaking weird. My best friend used to babysit a little boy who was about 3 or 4 years old. He was one of those kids that would say weird, super intelligent things as if they're an old person in a little kid body. Anyway, he used to always tell my friend about quote-unquote baby Amber, who she assumed to be his imaginary friend. He would talk about taking care of her as if she was a real baby and he was her mother. He would also say so many weirdly detailed things about her and her life that it was scary. Baby Amber eventually turned into a group of kids that this boy would see and talk to and tell my friend about. They all had names, but I don't remember what they were. If they were at the park, he would want to push one of them in the kids' swing or take them for walks with them.
That's super intense for an imaginary friend group.
Yeah.
Where you're like in charge of all of them?
The one thing that absolutely scared the crap out of us was one day he told my friend that he was sad because baby Amber and her friends were all in the hospital. He never spoke about his friends again after that. That used to freak me the fuck out when my friend would tell me stories about his imaginary friends, and we still don't understand what was really going on there. Anyway, hope you guys found this as creepy and weird as I did. Keep killing it on the pod, Elena.
Right on.
Thank you so much, Elena. Yeah, what's funny is that my sister brought her daughter out here recently, and she had an imaginary friend.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's weird. I don't even know how to handle it.
The imaginary friend was very nice, too, and the imaginary friend, I can't remember what it was named, liked all of us. I think she said that she liked all of us, and she was very happy to be, like, hanging out with us and stuff like that. And then occasionally the imaginary friend wasn't really there. So, yeah, it was a weird experience to be around. I mean, it's something that kids do, kids especially with a lot of imagination, and she definitely has a lot of imagination.
Right, and she talks like an adult in a little kid's body.
Yeah,
so.
She does. She uses phrases like, or I shouldn't say phrases, but words like hydrate. Like, if she wants to drink, she's like, I need to hydrate. And I'm just like, geez.
Or like, that's inappropriate.
Yeah, she's adorable. So, right on. Yeah, imaginary friends are something I never really dealt with growing up. I pretended like I played and pretended like with friends and stuff like that. You know, where you imagine you're like
I think
a
playing
cop or a
pretend
robber or
is
whatever.
different, though.
I think it's almost like another vein of that for those of you who don't understand what an imaginary friend is. It's just like a persistent way that you play, maybe, but like it's not something
it's like
where
you're talking to something that's not there.
Yeah, and I think that's just part of it. It's like you're kind of always in play mode, or like that play mode always like crops up and talks to you. But I don't know. It's a weird thing. So keep sending those stories, and maybe the more we hear, the more we'll develop a theory on it. So, right on. I'm going to move on to my homegrown horror for this episode. So it goes like this. Yo, dogs. Hello.
Hello.
We didn't say hello to the person that emailed you, by the way.
Oh,
so,
fuck.
hello for them. And then this one. My name is Derek, and I am from a small town in Michigan called Memphis, named after Memphis, Egypt, not Tennessee.
That's hilarious.
I like that little slight, like, by the way, fuck you, Tennessee. I found your podcast on Spotify after listening to some other spooky podcasts, and your show came up in suggested for you section, indie suggested for you section.
That's awesome.
And I'm glad I found it. I love the way your podcast is structured, and you are both very funny and really great to listen to while I work. Thank you.
That's awesome.
Many of your stories have given me the chills, and I figured I would try and share a story from my hometown. This story may be a little long, but I wanted to be sure to include the creepy history before recounting my personal experiences. Bear with me, it's worth it. The population of Memphis, Michigan is right around 1,500 people. We have 1 traffic light, 2 gas stations, and 4 bars within a square mile.
Wow.
I like that you have 4 times as many bars as you do traffic lights. However, just outside of the mile on the south end of town is a small cemetery, maybe 100 plots or so. In the very back northwest corner of the cemetery, an entire family is buried there.
Oh, wow.
The Millers. Mom, dad, and 8 kids. Wow, that's a full family.
That is a huge family. Oh, God, but why are they all buried there?
Now, the legend of the Miller family comes from the late 1800s. The story goes that Mrs. Miller was a witch of sorts and one day snapped and murdered her husband and all 8 of her children before being hanged in the center of town for these crimes. Though, if you look at the children's headstones, the dates of their passing scatter across several years, some living long lives. So, like most like local legends, it's probably based in bullshit.
Yeah.
But there might be a sprinkle of truth in there. That's just me commenting on it. Getting back to the email. The email says, the problem with this legend is that people come to see the witch's ball from all over with a tale that the ball itself is what is haunted. What is the witch's ball?
Yeah.
But they're wrong. The cemetery as a whole is what is haunted. The ball is just the tool that the spirits use to communicate. Okay, so there are pictures attached to this, and I'm looking at them right now, and it looks like the headstone itself is almost like a large orb. So that must be what's being referenced here. Okay, so that's cool. So the ball itself, the ball is just the tool the spirits use to communicate. If you walk back to see the dark ball at dusk, you can see apparitions appear in the reflection of the ball. Menacing dark shadows appear to be standing behind you.
Oh my gosh.
Orbs can be seen in photos, and voices can be heard, some friendly, but most aren't as they scream at you to get away while you feel a presence sort of pushing you out of the cemetery.
That's so creepy.
Yeah, the ball itself is known to rotate on its own concrete base, but this massive marble ball weighs well over a ton and has no physical way of rotating on its own, and there's no way you're pushing it. In 2010, a group of friends, including myself, got the bug to go chase haunted legends in the area.
Why? Why do people do this?
One was a bridge where several teens had jumped to their deaths. Another was Morrow Road, in parentheses, another great story that can be found online. I think we've heard of Morrow Road in the past, too. And we ended the night at the Witch's Ball. We drove to the back of the cemetery and got out of our cars. We circled the ball, no lights, completely quiet except for the woodland sounds and traffic on the highway. We held hands and started walking counterclockwise around the ball while chanting a saying that I wish I could remember for you.
God.
That sounds pretty dumb. Unless it's like, go Bears, which you wouldn't say because you're in Michigan, so you're probably a Lions fan. The group became louder as we continued to circle the ball, and all at once it stopped, as did all of us in place, as one of us dropped to the ground and began convulsing uncontrollably.
What?
Until his body stopped and he passed out. As soon as his body stopped, others swear they could hear someone screaming in the woods. We ran, didn't stick around to find out who may be screaming.
Did they take their friend?
It says in the next sentence, the kid was okay, everyone made it back to the house safely, but to my knowledge, no one has ever gone back. I have included images in this email and a couple of links to some articles and videos about the ball. I apologize for the long story. That's totally okay. Though I hope to hear this told on the podcast. Love the show and keep on creeping on.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, that was really good. Thank you so much for sending that in, Derek. We appreciate that. Obviously, this is one of those cases of like being young and screwing around and going and checking out the haunted stuff. But yeah, so this image, he sent 3 images, and then there's also some stuff like articles and stuff like that. But it just looks like a giant marble on top of a headstone, like a large headstone. So yeah, I wouldn't recommend like spinning around it and chanting. And I really wonder what you would be chanting too. So, and there's a picture of like what, is probably supposed to be spirit orbs, like full disclosure. There appears to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that I can see just looking at it. Really? And they look a lot like what, any like particulate floating through the air would look like if it was hit with a flash from a camera. But at the same time, who knows? So it's a really good story, and I kind of want to go check this thing out. Just, I don't know. I have that urge, as a 33-year-old adult still to do, so I understand why people do it. But maybe we're going to have to do like a Haunted Michigan episode sooner or later. I know we've talked about doing like state-themed episodes.
Yeah.
Where we both just pick a topic from one state and then go from there. So if we do that, I think we're going to have to revisit this one.
Cool.
So good stuff. Thank you for sending that in, Derek. And one last time, if you guys want to send in your stories, you can email storytime@scarish.com. So I think that actually about does it for Homegrown Horror this week, unless I'm mistaken.
No, I think that's it. I don't have another one. So
okay, yeah, we're only doing one each. It's normally what we do, I think.
Yeah. Okay, so this week, I know we said we wouldn't do like creepypasta type things, but this one's one of my favorites.
But you've decided to go against everything we stand for.
No, it's just, this one is one of my favorites, and it's like the creepiest one to me that is just so good, and like it's taken on a life of its own. There are so many people out there that actually ask the question, like, is it real?
So you're saying it's not? It's
not real. It's a creepypasta. But
so explain, before we get into which one you're doing, what a creepypasta is for people who might not know, because I started a ghost story podcast or a paranormal podcast with you, and I didn't know what a creepypasta was. So
creepypasta is just like online fiction that's gone like internet viral.
So you're writing basically a paranormal themed fiction,
right,
or fake story, for those of you who don't know what fiction means.
And this one is just so ridiculously good, and it's like turned into kind of like an urban legend of its own, because it some parts of it you'd think are actually, it could possibly happen because things like that did happen during that time period.
So are you just going to read the story, or are you going to do like a recap of what the story is?
A recap / storytelling / interject my own thoughts.
Okay, that sounds cool. That sounds like fun.
So I thought I'd share it. I know a lot of you guys have probably heard of the Russian sleep experiment before.
I'm not raising my hand because I've never heard of it. I've heard it suggested to us that we should do it. So
yeah, and
it's good to know that it originated from a creepypasta, because to this point I had no idea.
Yeah, and it's so I'm gonna share it with you guys. I know a lot of you probably heard it, but for those that haven't heard it, I love it. It's like one of my faves. I think it's really good. So each week is kind of like a struggle for us, not to actually find topics, but
pick one.
Yeah, you all send us so many. It's actually hard to decide on which one we want to do, and we're definitely going to start posting some polls soon, because we're starting to build up some topics, and it's just you guys are going to help us out, and so keep an eye out for those. And this week, I just wanted to do something super fun and super creepy, and I know Halloween is coming up, so we're gonna have a lot more of I think creepier topics. Maybe,
I don't know, you yelled at me for the one that I'm doing this week. You're like, you're not gonna save that until October.
I would save it till October, but
I've been told
whatever.
that I need to save topics for Halloween and October so many times. I'm like, no, I'm doing this one this day, like it's happening right now. So I'm proud of myself for sticking to my guns.
Okay, well, so for this one that I chose, again, if you guys have already heard it, I know it's been told over and over again, but the first time that I ever heard this story, I was legit like messed up, like what the fuck from it, because it's just so good. The story takes place in the late 1940s. It surrounds some Russian researchers that want to conduct an experiment in sleep deprivation. So they keep 5 political prisoners of World War II awake for 15 days during an experimental, using an experimental gas. And the way they get these people to want to get in and do it is that the researchers promise that these prisoners would be freed from any persecution or anything after they've lasted well, I almost like started doing accent talking or something, like so if they survived through this experiment for 30 days. So they
through this experiment
that's
for
why
30 days.
That's what almost came out of my mouth, man.
I could hear it, like you were on the edge of it.
So that's why they complied with going through all this. And so they were left isolated in a room with themselves, and everything was monitored in order to make sure that the gas wasn't killing them, as it could be toxic in high doses.
I like how excited you are about these details when this is totally a creepypasta.
Their oxygen was monitored, and as this was before the modern film era, there's only microphones and porthole-sized windows to monitor their actions. And if you guys don't know how big a porthole is or how small a porthole is, I think it's like big enough to like kind of fit someone's head in, right?
Maybe. You might be able to get your head through it.
They're tiny. So that's all they had, microphones and these porthole-sized windows. And they had anything that they would possibly want or / need in the room. So there were like books to read, beds to lay on. They had running water. They had the bathroom amenities type thing. And then they had food in there to last a month for all the test subjects. So there was no shortage of food. And surprisingly, things went well the first 5 days of sleeplessness. And towards the 4th day, the conversation became more and more dark and more macabre between the 5 of them. And they began talking more of like traumatic events in their lives. And after the 5th day, they started to complain about what brought them there, that got them into that situation in the first place. And so paranoia started taking root. They began to isolate themselves from each other, whispering into the microphones and portholes. They wanted to get out and thought that they could do so by becoming chummy with the researchers. So they would just whisper into the microphones instead of to each other, which is, I don't know, maybe in real life would maybe work. I don't know. As the activity began to escalate, researchers began to suspect the gas as the culprit for the strange activity. I mean, it couldn't be a lack of sleep, right? Like, it has to be the gas. You know, lack of sleep doesn't hurt anybody.
I mean, after 72 hours without sleep, I think you're determined to be legally insane.
Yeah, it's like so not good for you. Don't try to stay up as long as possible. It is not good for you. Side note, apparently there was a gas / chemical that was used during World War II to keep soldiers awake on the battlefield for extended periods of time.
That's probably some of the inspiration behind the story.
Yeah, so I don't know if that's true or not, or how true it is or whatever, but that'd be really interesting if that was like inspiration for this whole thing. So I don't know about you guys, but if I'm up for over 24 hours, I am not a happy camper. When I used to work in retail, there was a shift that I had to do for Black Friday that was from, I think, 7 p.m. on Thanksgiving Day to 7 a.m. the next morning. And it sucked. Like, I was just running on monsters. I think I had 4 that entire night. I totally got sick the next day. If you have ever given shit to an employee on Black Friday,
you're a horrible person.
Yeah, you should just
be set on fire.
Fuck yourself, because that is hard. It's such hard work, and they have to be there at horrible hours of the morning.
And they're making shit money, most likely, unless they're a manager, in which case they're barely making decent money.
Yeah, and you may be upset that you're shopping so late or so early.
Or that it's so busy.
Yeah, but you don't have to be there. And those employees are forced to be there because people want to shop.
And in most cases, if you try and say, like, if you try and request that day off, they'll tell you no. And if you try and call out, you'll be fired.
Yeah. And I've had someone ask me at 3 a.m, like, OMG, why are you guys even here right now? And I was just like, lady, I'm here because you're fucking here. Get the fuck out. Like,
but even if she leaves, you still have to be there. That's just the nature of retail. That's really the scary thing about this story so far.
Is
working retail. It's terrifying.
It sucks, dude, guys.
If you treat people like crap who work retail, you're just a turd of a human being. I'm trying not to be super mean about it, but like there's difference if you have bad service and you're like offended by someone's bad service. But if you're just being a bitch to be a bitch, or you're being pouty because like the item you have isn't in stock, or the item you want isn't in stock, or it's like, oh, well, there's a display case on the floor. It's like, that's what display cases are for.
Or it's like when you're trying to get an employee to call up another store on Black Friday to ask if they have this product.
Right.
It's like, no. Honestly,
no. I think the most painful thing for me when I worked Black Friday was when people asked, like, do you have any in the back? And it's like, well, one, you're going to check a computer that tells you what your inventory is. So, no, you don't have any in the back. Two, if it says 0 and you want me to go check the back for any random location that it might be, you're wanting me to search the whole store on Black Friday. And 3, I know it's in the back because I fucking lived in my store when I worked retail.
Yeah.
So, like, you know where everything is. So, yeah, that's a fun side topic.
Side note. Yeah,
for
side note.
Retail terrors.
It's retail terror. But seriously, staying up for more than 24 hours blows. And it just does not feel good. It really doesn't. I know when we were prepping for the con even, I was like so tired because we'd be at the con all day and then we would go home and make stuff. And then I'd be up until like 2 a.m. and then go back again. And it was just like so tired. I don't know how anybody would want to stay awake.
Yeah, that's why a lot of people that are super hyper busy wind up doing a bunch of cocaine so they can stay awake and feel functional.
Does that help, cocaine?
I mean, yeah, it's an upper. So you're just like, it's like you're fucking wired.
Oh.
So it's like, okay, don't do cocaine, people. I'm not going to give you any more descriptions of what that drug is like.
Okay.
That said, I will say that when we had family in town, we had like a busy fucking week planned, and we had to have an episode recorded and edited and scheduled to be posted by like the end of, I think, Monday, because Tuesday morning we were going somewhere. We were going to be there all Tuesday, and then Wednesday, Thursday, Friday we were going to be in a different part of the country. And I know that Monday was super fucking busy all day. And we had recorded the episode, and I had to come home and edit it. And when we got home, it was like 2 a.m. And I was like, this edit is going to take me at least 2 hours. And I was just like, I'm not going to sleep until probably the sun's coming up. And then we had to wake up at 7 a.m. and drive like 4 hours, I think it was. I think we went to San Diego.
Yeah.
And I was just like, I am so fucking tired right now. I'm operating on 0 sleep. And that's just not fun. Like, maybe it's fun when you're younger. You know, it's like you beat the night when you see the sun come up.
We're old and our bodies are falling apart, so...
I don't know about falling apart, but yeah, our bodies can't do exactly what they used to when we were younger.
Okay, anyway, back to the story. Those are our real-life horrors. Here's back to the story. So, after 9 days of being in that room, subjected to those gases, one of the subjects began to just scream, running around in the room and yelling for 3 hours straight. And he literally screamed his throat raw. Like, probably, the researchers thought he probably, like, tore his vocal cords. Like, every time he tried to scream after that, he could only squeak. That's how fucked up his throat was. And despite this outburst, none of the others in the room reacted to it at all. They just kept whispering into the microphones. And then another one began screaming. So 2 others, instead of screaming, took the books apart, smeared the pages with their own excrement, and plastered the pages over the portholes. And they did this calmly.
This is bizarre. Who writes this shit?
Eventually, the scream, or not eventually, but as soon as they like plastered over the portholes, the screaming stopped. And then even the whispering stopped. 3 more days went by and there was no sound. And researchers checked the microphones to make sure they were in order because there was no sound. And 5 people in a room, no sound, does not make sense. So oxygen monitors that they had put in there showed that they were all still alive. The amount of oxygen being consumed seemed like they were doing strenuous exercise within. And it's like, how is that physically possible without sound? You know what I mean? Why does it sound like they're doing exercise if they're not making any noise?
Right.
On the 14th day, researchers decided to use the intercom to get a reaction from the subjects. They wanted some sort of information or notice that they were still alive. So what they did was they used the intercom and they announced, we're opening the chamber to test the microphones. Step away from the door and lie flat on the floor or you will be shot. Compliance will earn one of you your immediate freedom. One, that's fucked up because why is it only one of them? One calm voice responded, we no longer want to be freed. So it's been 12 days, I think. 12 days or 14 days, I'm sorry, 14 days in that room awake. So to me, that line like freaked me out when I first heard it, because it's like, they've been in this room, no sleep, 14 days. What if I were awake for that long?
Yeah, I can't imagine being awake for 14 days.
What if it like opened your mind to something? Because we've never experienced it, but what if it opened your mind to something, and no one's been in the world has been awake that long.
What's the record for how long someone stayed awake?
Well, let me tell you. So the record so the record for the amount of time someone's spent awake is 264 hours, and it was set by a 17-year-old high school student by the name of Randy Gardner in 1965. So that's 11 days he stayed awake. 11 days. And there have been others that have stayed awake for 8 to 10 days, all of which had no serious medical, neurological, physiological, or psychiatric problems. But they did show progressive and significant deficits in concentration, motivation, perception, and other mental processes.
No shit. Your brain is tired after 8 days awake.
So it's like you can't really do anything anymore.
Don't you start to micro-sleep when you've been awake that long, too? You don't realize you're sleeping, but you'll slip in and out of consciousness?
I think so. I don't doubt it. But these people were able to recover to normality within 1 or 2 nights of recovery sleep. So you're exhausted, but like your body knows how to catch up.
Right. Eventually your brain will reset.
Yeah. And there are medical conditions like Morvan syndrome that give you virtually no sleep. During this, though, those with these types of disorders experience auditory, visual, olfactory, which are your smells, and somaesthetic, which is your sense of touch, hallucinations. So these people that have these disorders that don't allow them to sleep, they just
dream
fucking
while
hallucinate.
awake, basically.
Yeah. And I think that's just insane. It just must be so hard to live with. But they also experience pain in their fingers and toes, which sucks. There's also another disorder called fatal familial insomnia that's fatal after 6 to 30 months without sleep. So that's kind of fucking rough.
Yeah.
But it's more from organ failure than actual sleep deprivation. Your body starts shutting down because there's not enough like rest, I guess.
Yeah, your body cannot keep functioning without actually sleeping, which is just so bizarre to think of like the human body as like if you were a robot and someone made a robot, you're like, hey, this robot functions at perfect capacity for around 16 hours. It needs to shut down for 8 hours to reboot its system, or else it'll eventually die.
Yeah, there have been a lot of experiments on like rats and puppies. There was one that someone did with puppies.
That's horrible.
Yeah, and so they kept them awake and wouldn't let them sleep, and they would die.
That's fucking awful. I don't like this.
It's fucked up, okay? People experiment and do horrible things.
So we're not in the creepypasta right now, right? You're telling me
that's
things
real
that
life.
are real. Okay.
That's real life.
So we're shifting back into creepypasta mode now?
Okay, yes, let's go back into the creepypasta mode. So, back to the Russian sleep experiment. After the response that they got that the subjects didn't want to be free, the researchers debated on what they should do, and they decided to open the chamber on the 15th day, and they flushed the gas out of the chamber and filled the room with fresh air. And the subjects that were there began to object. Like, they were like, please fucking give us the gas. So 3 of them began to beg for the gas to be turned back on. Soldiers were sent in to retrieve the subjects. The subjects began to scream louder than before, followed by these screams of the soldiers because of what they fucking saw. And so what they saw was like ridiculously super horrifying. 4 of the 5 subjects were alive, but barely. Like, if you could call it alive. And the food that they had given them was barely touched. Chunks of the dead test subjects' thighs and chests were shoved into the drain in the center of the room, effectively blocking the drain, allowing 4 inches of water and blood to pool, which is fucking gross.
How big was this room again? I don't know if there's enough blood in the human body to pool 4 inches worth of blood.
what about 5 people?
I thought they said 4 of the 5 people were alive.
Were still alive, if you could call it alive. So, the survivors had chunks of skin and muscle torn away, and it seemed like the wounds were caused by hand, not teeth, so they were like ripped away by hands, and they were self-inflicted. So, they were laying there with their like organs like hanging out of their body, like laying on their beds with them, like their body parts just like sitting outside of themselves, and you could like see their rib cage.
Gross.
Yeah, like fucking
so
gross.
People voluntarily read this story, right?
Yeah, and you could see like them actually digesting their own flesh that they'd eaten. Like, seriously, guys, this story fucked me up. When I first heard it, I was like, what the hell? Why? The soldiers that were sent in were Russian special ops, but many refused to return to remove the test subjects. Those subjects that were left alive kept begging for the gas to be turned on, not wanting to fall asleep. They even put up a fight when someone attempted to remove them. One of the soldiers even had his throat ripped out. Another had his balls ripped off and an artery severed by being bitten in the leg. I don't know, man.
He had his balls ripped off. That just sounds so crazy.
5 other soldiers took their own lives in the weeks that followed. During removal, one of the surviving subjects had his spleen rupture and bled out. The other 3 consisted of 2 with intact vocal cords still begging for gas. The most injured of the 3 was taken into surgery, but as soon as he was sedated, his eyes closed, his heart stopped. So as soon as he went to sleep, he died. The next was the first of the 5 to have started screaming. So they were able to perform surgery on him without anesthetic. And one of the nurses claimed to have seen him smile whenever they made eye contact during the procedure. So they couldn't put him to sleep or anything. So they did it without anesthetic. And he was just like, liking it? Like, what the fuck?
Yeah, it's super bizarre.
Afterwards, they wanted to give them a message. The subject wanted to give them a message, so the doctors gave them a pen and paper only for him to write, "Keep cutting."
Wow.
Like, oh my God. I don't know, this story just like freaked me out. Okay. The final 2 laughed during their operation only to ask for more of the stimulant gas. And when asked why they did all these things to themselves, the response was, "I must remain awake." I just like, it freaks me out because they've been awake for 15 days.
It's so bizarre because there's all these, I don't know, maybe I have to read the creepypasta because there's so much happening. Like it's heavy on plot, but not heavy on like why or like the nuance.
It's because they're creepypasta. They're not like novels.
Yeah, I know. It's just weird.
Just enjoy it.
Okay.
So researchers restrained the test subjects and placed them back within the chamber, and they debated on what to do with them. Even considering euthanasia, so like putting them all to sleep. The commanding military officer wanted to see what would happen if they were to go back in under gas. And the researchers were just like, no way. That's not a good idea. And the military was just like, no, we're going to fucking do this. You're going to put them under again. And so the researchers put him back in there. They connected all the subjects to EEG, which is a device that measures your brain activity and brain waves and stuff, and had their restraints reinforced. Once they found out that they were going to be exposed to the gas, the subjects actually like stopped resisting and were like, yes, happy, like we're gonna go under, blah blah blah, whatever. And after wiring the first subject in, researchers were baffled by what they saw on the EEG. Brain waves would be normal, but would flatline inexplicably. So it was as if they were suffering brain death over and over again. And once the brain waves went into deep sleep, the heart stopped for that first person.
So I thought they were getting the gas. Why would that person fall asleep?
They haven't been put under yet. Because they're still hooking everybody up. So the first person that they hooked up to the EEG, they were reading their brain waves, and they fell asleep, and they died.
Okay.
Like their heart stopped. So this left only one remaining speaking subject and one that doesn't speak. And so they had the same brainwaves as the last. The commander ordered for the final survivors and 3 researchers to be sealed in. When he said that, one of the researchers immediately pulled a gun and shot the commander, then turned to the mute subject and killed him as well. And then he pointed the gun to the last survivor as everyone else fled the room. And he yelled at that last survivor, quote, "I won't be locked in here with these things, not with you. What are you? I must know," end quote. And so the subject smiled and said, "Have you forgotten so easily? We're the madness that lurks within you all, begging to be free at every moment in your deepest animal mind. We're what hide from in your beds every night. We're what you sedate into silence and paralysis when you go to the nocturnal haven where we cannot tread." And so the researcher paused and then aimed at the subject's heart and fired, killing them. And all that the subject could eke out was so nearly free.
That's really creepy.
It's so creepy. It's just like, it's like a being that's trying to get out of some other plane, you know?
Right. I mean, yeah,
It's
I
just
guess
like-
it's speculation.
Speculation. And it's all it is, you know? You can just have fun with it and think like all these different ideas. I don't know. But that was my lovely sharing of my favorite creepypasta story. I know we said we wouldn't do it, but I really felt like I had to this time because it's my favorite and it's freaky. And I'm not going to go around saying that it's a true story or that it's real. It's just a creepy story. And maybe in the future we'll do like live readings of horror stories and stuff like that. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I thought it'd be cool. And to whoever wrote this one, bravo. You creeped me out. I think it's awesome. The fact that there were so many actual experiments that were conducted during this time period makes it even creepier. Because I know like Mengele and all that stuff were doing all those experiments. And I'll probably try to do one of those actual instances sometime in the future. So, but I don't know. I like having fun with these stories and kind of thinking about why and what possibly could have wanted to come out. And, you know,
Yeah, I think when it
It's
comes
just-
to creepypastas, I need to read it before we do them, just so I can speculate a little bit more on them, because like I'm trying to process stuff like not completed, and then I don't have as much speculation to give because I'm like, well, what happens next? So it's different. It's definitely a different format than I'm used to doing. So, but it's still pretty fun.
I don't
So-
know. I really like them. They're fun to read and they're fun to, I don't know, use your imagination on. Just have fun with it.
I tried to read one when we were told about what they were, and it was about that SpongeBob episode. And of course, it's creepypasta, so it's all fake. But it was about like a SpongeBob episode that someone edited that like an animator had created and somehow sent over for like broadcasting. I can't even remember what the guy was supposed to be editing, but like I don't think the person who wrote it was familiar with the editing process of an animation program, where it's like all the things that would have had to have been done to get to the point where it went to this guy, because it was like basically a completed product that was sent to an editor, which I'm like, that's not exactly what an editor does for animation. But it was just like really weird and creepy, and it's just like reading something without the nuance of like, why is this happening? It's like, oh, this is just a really weird thing that's going to happen. It's odd to me, but at the same time, it's similar to a lot of the actual creepy stories that we tell anyways, because like a lot of those things don't have explanation, and that's
Right.
kind of the context we're trying to provide usually when we do these things.
Yeah.
Cool.
So it's just fun stuff. I just think it's fun things to read. I like reading creepy, weird, nonsensical stuff. It's what we do.
Right on.
So, yeah.
I just started reading a book. It's not horror or anything like that, but it's called The Fifth Season, and I'm really into it right now. I decided I'd start reading it, and I usually give a book like the prologue and the first chapter before I decide whether or not I'm going to drop it. And like 5 pages in, I'm like, okay, I need to know more. And that's basically how the entire book has been so far. Not related, but I really like The Fifth Season. So,
Okay.
yeah, good stuff. But I guess I'll shift over into my topic, which is not a creepypasta, unless it's like one of the most original creepypastas that ever came about, because it's been around for a very long time. And anyone who's looked at the episode title already knows what I'm doing. But 2 weeks ago, I did a monster. And I mean, that is to say that my topic was a monster. I'm not like confessing to having sex with a monster 2 weeks ago. So
Gross.
I'm just saying like that didn't happen. Anyways, last week I did a movie, so I told myself no monsters this week, no movies this week, because those are my last 2 weeks. And then after about like 2 minutes of Googling, I said, fuck it, I'm doing a monster, because I really wanted to do a monster. And then I spent around 2.5 hours to 3 hours, like I said, chasing down a claim that one website had made about a legend that turned out to be bullshit that didn't actually exist. So I'm really annoyed about that. And I spent a lot of time doing a bunch of research to try and corroborate any part of it, and I couldn't find anything. It was something about like a Mayan legend that actually didn't exist around a creature that does. And I was just like, okay, fuck this, I'm starting over. So I stopped, shut down, was like, all right, what do I want to do? What's a monster that everyone knows about that I want to dig into that I haven't done? So I refocused, and I'm happier with this topic in the first place. So this week, I'm going to present to you my first take, because I will do these multiple times, obviously, for the bigger ones, but I present to you vampires.
So we both did something that's not real.
Yeah, I mean, like every week, I suppose. So
it's perfect.
The difference is that the things I'm about to read to you are things that have been documented in history, and then where all these myths came from, and then like an actual true story of something that was someone who was supposed to have been a vampire.
Was it Nosferatu?
No, that's not. That's a movie. So we're going to go ahead and jump into it. So after getting skunked on the first monster adventure I tried to run down this week, I decided that I wanted to do this because it had lots of documentation, and I don't think there's like a more documented monster than vampires.
Even werewolves?
Yes, even werewolves. I think vampires are far more documented than them. And there are two things that I told myself I had to do and be satisfied with if I was going to tackle this topic. I had to at least try and find the origin of the vampire myth. And the second one is that I needed to find a real-life story of a supposed vampire throughout history. I hope you could hear my air quotes for vampire. And as a side note, I'm not talking about present-day individuals who claim they're vampires because of either a pigment deficiency or an allergy to the sun or sharp canines for teeth, or the fact that they like the taste of blood. It's like, I'm talking about like what we actually think a vampire is. Was there a documented case of that throughout history? So that said, I want to do a little experiment before we get started. And since Robin is fairly well versed in, a version of the vampire mythology,
I read a lot of stuff on vampires, actually.
I want to see what sort of things most of us associate with vampires. Like when I would say the phrase, describe a vampire, what sorts of characteristics or rules come to mind? Because I'm sure anyone who's listening right now, when I say describe a vampire, you can imagine the ways in which you would describe a vampire to someone who doesn't know what a vampire is. And that said, Robin, how would you describe a vampire?
So, someone who's pale, probably, because they don't see the sun. Can't go in the sun, because they'll fucking burn. Doesn't like garlic, even though it's fucking delicious. Drinks blood. What else? Let's see. Sharp teeth. What else? Fuck. They don't age.
Okay.
Can't see them in mirrors.
Okay.
But I read somewhere where it's like back in the day, they used to line the backs of mirrors with silver so you couldn't see them because they don't like silver, right? So you couldn't see them in the reflections because that mirror was backed with silver. But now modern mirrors are no longer backed with silver.
So you'd be able to see a vampire?
You'd be able to see a vampire in the mirror, which I thought was like the coolest thing. But I don't know. Oh, crosses. Don't like crosses. Okay. Stake to the heart.
Okay. So, like, for me, I grew up watching vampire movies of, like, the 80s and 90s. So, like, the sparkling and the sun thing from Twilight is just, like, a slap to my face. And that's why I really just can't stand the idea.
Did you read any of the Anne Rice ones?
I read part of the Vampire Lestat. Or, I think it was the Vampire Lestat. Lestat, whatever. But I can't remember much of it because I was a kid. It was right when Interview with the Vampire came out, and I tried to read those Anne Rice books.
Oh, okay. I just worked at a bookstore, that's why.
Yeah, but the way I describe a vampire is, I mean, it's pretty basic, and it's very similar to yours, to be honest. And like the ones I wrote down is that they're pale, they drink blood, they have the ability to turn another person into a vampire by
siring them,
by killing them when drinking from them, or by not killing them when drinking from them. Because when I was growing up and watching movies, there wasn't a huge process involved to making a vampire other than...
For me, it's like, you drink my blood, then I'll drink from you, and then if I don't kill you, then you turn.
So there's this huge process, and there's always a difference in the process depending on which kind of movie, which movie you watch, or which book you read. And so it's funny because, like, essentially, we all know that the movies and the books that we read are fake, but we all have a different version of like the mythology of how this happens, which is exactly like an actual story of like something like the Loch Ness Monster, where there's like different accounts on like what it looks like or how long it is or how long it's been around or shit like that. It's like other things that I wrote down too is you can't see them in a mirror. I put that down too. Garlic drives them away. Holy water hurts it.
Oh, yeah.
Silver hurts it. Crosses hurt it. And I put in parentheses, but you have to actually believe in the cross. Whoever's wielding the cross needs to be a Christian. And I got that straight from the original Fright Night with Vincent Price, because he's a fraud and he doesn't believe in God, and he's using a cross on a vampire, and the vampire tells him, like, you actually have to believe in it for it to work. And I really like that rule. So it's just always been part of like what I think vampires are. And then wooden or silver stake to the heart and sunlight are the only ways to kill it. And this is another one I put down. If you kill a master vampire, so someone who's turned someone else,
all of the sired vampires die.
I put down that although that most people think that they'll turn back to human, because in a lot of movies I remember that was the plot, like kill the master vampire, save the girl.
Yeah.
That they're just released. They're still vampires, but they're not under their thrall anymore.
Yeah.
So like there's all these different rules and there's all these different things. And
I
the reason
like having all of the sired vampires die.
I like the idea, but at the same time, like what if you don't want to kill one of the sired vampires? So it's funny because we're going over like the vampire like mythos, so to speak, but like these are just things that we've picked up from movies. So how you base your vampire myth is based off of, one, the earliest exposure you probably had to it, and two, your favorite exposure that you had to it. So there's just a bunch of different rules that we don't know where they came from.
I like the Leslie Nielsen vampire.
The Leslie Nielsen vampire?
Yeah.
I forget what the name of that was.
Oh my god.
Dracula Sucks?
Dracula 2000 or something?
No, that's a completely different movie that takes it way too seriously.
Something Dead and Loving It.
Dead and Loving It. Dracula Dead and Loving It. That's it. I have a friend who met Leslie Nielsen.
What?
Yeah, Lee.
Oh, that's
Lee
so
met
cool.
Leslie Nielsen.
Jelly.
So I wanted to do something when it came to this topic where I could find something actually documented and from early as possible. So I did a fuck ton of research on the different origins, and I mean a fuck ton. Like I researched Nordic, I researched Christian, I researched Jewish. I didn't just research religions.
Vampires?
There's a precedent for it in every one of those religions. And on top of that, I researched places. So I researched places like Hungary and Albania and Poland and India and Egypt and China, and even ancient civilizations like the Greeks or the Mayans or the Aztecs.
What?
And while doing my research, two things dawned on me while I was doing it. The first was that it's almost entirely impossible to nail down the origin or figure out where the very first story of a vampire came from.
Okay.
And the second thing that dawned on me is it's directly because all of those civilizations or places or religions, regardless of geographic location or time, they have a variation of this legend. And full disclosure, going into this topic, like I think vampires are almost certainly complete bullshit. Like that said, when doing this research,
I want to believe.
I found it super creepy that all of these civilizations and every one that I researched have creatures that were, one, beings of evil, and two, usually a reanimated dead person or a person that didn't actually die, and three, they sustain themselves by drinking the blood of the living. And they've been around since basically people have been around. Like, as long as there's been people around, people have talked about a creature in the night that comes that looks like someone who just recently died, or someone who's been sick that feeds off the blood of the living. And that really creeped me out. So I thought about having a section of this script that I wrote where I'd read a bunch of the names used for vampires across all these civilizations that I researched. And I found a list of the different names used across the folklores of the world for vampires. And the reason I don't have that list is because there's close to 80 to 100 different words or names associated for the different creatures across time associated with the vampire myth. And that's a fuck ton. Like, if you sit down and think about all the different cultures and religions and races and places, they all have a version of this. And that part creeps me out, I think, more than anything else. Because it's not like, this isn't something that's just a fad that crops up every time a writer decides to put a cheesy romance story through, like, a supernatural filter. And typically they do that because it's really just an allegory for, like, class or race relations in the society it's based in. And, like, this is an actual thing that's been around forever. Like, for a very long time. And, like, as a side note, the one I want to talk about is Dracula, because Bram Stoker was the author of Dracula, which is, like, for the most part, the most well-known vampire story to date.
Wasn't that written with all those other authors in that, like, they all got locked into a house and then they all...
Like Mary Shelley, how she wrote Frankenstein. I'm not sure if Bram Stoker was part of that group, but it was around the same time for sure.
Okay.
And so, like, that said, like, that mythos established a bunch of the rules that we know. And they don't have a lot to do with like the present day Twilight vampires, which is
what
like...
about the Vampire Diaries vampires?
I don't know what their lore is, so I couldn't tell you. But it's important to note that although Stoker used an actual human being for inspiration, which was Vlad Dracula, also known as Vlad the Impaler, he knew basically nothing about the history of that actual man, because a lot of people like to attach Vlad the Impaler's life to like the start of the vampire mythology, which is 100% like not accurate. Because they didn't match up at all. He lived in like the 1400s, and he's not from a place called Transylvania, and he didn't come back as a vampire, and like all those things don't match. And like the thing that I thought was really funny is that the character is a work of fiction, so there's nothing really wrong with being inspired by someone, because the book is a work of fiction. But don't confuse that fiction with fact, because like it would be like if in 200 years someone looked back and talked about Abraham Lincoln and quoted stuff from Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter.
That would be amazing.
Instead of like Abraham Lincoln's actual life. And then that story started to fade away. It's completely different. You know what I mean? So, side note, Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, good book, awful movie, hated the fucking movie. The book is actually really good. I really liked it.
You don't like Howard Stark in it?
Howard Stark?
Isn't
No,
he
I mean, like, he's okay as Henry, but like... everything is so much different in the book, and it's so much better, and it's written so much. I think it's Seth Grahame-Smith, the guy who did the Zombie Survival Guide and Pride and Prejudice and Zombies and all those. And it's really good. He does like historical fiction where he changes something but uses an actual setting, which is kind of what Dracula was. You know, it's like Vlad Dracula became this vampire, and he had all these different rules. So that said, let's try and figure out what the actual origin of this myth is. And some places on the internet, and I mean a lot of them actually, say that the earliest telling of the story of a vampire is the story of someone named Ambrosio, and it's from Greek lore. And I will tell you this story, but it is important to note that when I was trying to actually date when the story of Ambrosio first appeared, I found that this story came from not the Greek Empire time. I mean, it's set during the Greek Empire, but it wasn't told during that time.
Okay.
In fact, the story comes from something known as the Scriptures of Delphi, which could be a topic that I could discuss on its own. Because essentially, to break this down to make this not that long, is that there's skepticism surrounding all the stories within the Scriptures of Delphi, and it's because these were not written at all during the time of the Empire. In fact, some people say they were written as early as like a few decades ago. They say there's documentation showing some of these stories maybe going back to the early to late 1800s. It's not really known. But a lot of places say it's not a credible source to cite for actual Greek lore. It's like stuff that was written after the fact, way after the fact, saying like this used to be a story. You know, it's like if someone added a chapter to a book like 3,000 years after it came out, and then acted like that chapter was written at the same time. So a lot of places don't use it as sources. That said, some places do use it as a source, and those places include places like History.com or the History Channel. And a ton of different websites that say like, hey, this is like the first myth.
Okay.
Because the Delphi scriptures the Scriptures of Delphi are like controversial, but a lot of places give them credit, and I'm kind of skeptical on it. So before I tell you the story, I wanted to say up front that I'm skeptical of the authenticity, and as I go through the story, you'll kind of hear that in my voice, I'm sure. But a lot of official sites for places that are like historically accurate treat this like it's something that should actually be considered history. So I'll tell you the story of Ambrosio now. So the story goes, there's this guy named Ambrosio, and even though this story is set in ancient Greece, he was fucking Italian. And he was an adventurer. My fingers are like all tight together like that meme. He was an adventurer who had cruised into Greece, and he wanted to get his fortune told by the Oracle of Delphi, which was a big fucking deal. Like, she was a big deal. And I should note, Delphi is a place, not a person. So he showed up and he was like, yo, dog, tell me my fortune. And she said, ask again later. So
what is she, a horrible 8-ball?
He shook her again, and that little triangle thing floated up in that blue liquid. And this is what it said. And I put in parentheses, that's a magical 8-ball joke. If you don't get it, fuck you. But I'm glad you got it. But this is what it supposedly said, or she supposedly said. The curse, the moon, the blood will run. So he was like, damn, this fucking thing is broken. I'll try again tomorrow.
I'm just thinking about Game of Thrones now, and Cersei's like, fortune.
Which is going to come true. I can't wait for this last season. Okay, getting back to it. So he went outside of this temple that the Oracle was in, and he crashed out in front of it. And he was basically like, I'm going to wait till morning so he could see her again and see what's going on. And when he woke up, he saw a beautiful young woman approaching the temple, and her name was Selene, and she was the oracle's sister. Now, a couple of the different places I've read this story, because there's a fuck ton of tellings of this story, state that she wasn't the sister, she was actually someone else, but the general consensus is that this chick is the oracle's sister. And she was there to kind of clean up the temple and take care of the oracle because she was a mistress of the temple. And Ambrosio didn't just go for broke and ask her out on the spot. Like, he showed up, he talked to her that day, and then she went inside. And then he showed up in the morning every day so that he could kind of court her and get to know her, and eventually they fell in love. Oh,
God, okay.
The thing that sucks is that this wasn't just any temple, this was a temple of Apollo.
What's
and Apollo is the god of sun, the god of the sun.
Okay.
And so he was watching this. And, I mean, it's his temple, so he's like, motherfucker, that chick is a maiden of my temple. And plus, he liked her too, because gods are notorious assholes when it comes to romance. So Ambrosio told Selene, meet me in the morning one day. One day he told her, like, meet me in the morning, and we're going to sail back to my home. Let's get married. Let's be together forever.
Okay.
And she's like, I'm going to do that. And Apollo was like, bet. So
what does that even mean?
He's like, I bet you that's not going to happen. So he cursed Ambrosio. And what was that curse? The curse is that the sun would burn his skin and cause him extraordinary pain, because Apollo was the god of the sun. So he couldn't meet her when the sun would rise in the morning to take her back. And in fact, when the sun came up, he was like, ow, this shit really hurts. So he hid in a cave, somewhere dark. And he was like, fucking Apollo, I'm going to hit up another god. So he texted Hades and was like, hey, you up? And Hades was like, yup. So they sat down and they worked out a deal in the underworld. And Hades was like, look, I'll let you go and get Selene, and you guys can live down here where the sun never shines, and Apollo can't fuck with you. But you got to steal something from me first. And Ambrosio was like, another fetch quest? This is why I quit WoW.
What?
So Hades wanted him to go steal the bow of Artemis. And for those of you who don't know who Artemis was a lot of things. She was the goddess of the hunt, and she was also Apollo's twin. So she's a god, and she's a badass. Okay. And she carried a silver bow. And Hades is like, go steal me that bow. And as a down payment for their deal, and because Ambrosio is really bad at negotiating, he had to give Hades his soul as a down payment. So he did, because he's an idiot. And there's some more weird details that I'm kind of going to gloss over, but the OG plan is basically Hades gives him this bow and 11 arrows, because I guess that's all he could fucking manage, even though he's a god. And he's like, okay, go kill something and present it to Artemis as a tribute, and then steal her bow. And Ambrosio went and started killing things. He started killing swans and using their blood to write poetry for Selene, so Selene could see these things, because she's going back to the same place, he said, to meet him, and he's writing her like this love poetry. And he's also a moron. So he runs through all his arrows. Side note, at this point, you're kind of trying too hard, because like blood poetry is pretty creepy. But somehow he burns through all of his arrows. He has nothing to present to Artemis, and he still manages to steal Artemis's bow. And I didn't get too in-depth in how, because I really don't care. What matters is that he does. So she notices that her bow is gone, and she knew who he was, so she's like, that son of a bitch. So Artemis curses him. So at this point, this dude has no soul, and he has 2 curses from 2 different gods. So what does her curse do? It makes it so that silver burns his skin and causes him extraordinary pain anytime it contacts him.
Because of the silver.
Because he's carrying her bow. And she knows where he's taking it. So he can't carry it. He just can't carry the bow now. I mean, unless he wrapped it in something first. But apparently he's a giant fucking moron. So that's not an option. So he falls to his knees and he prays. But he prays to Artemis. And he's basically like, look, I'm just trying to be in love. I'm stupid. The blood poetry in retrospect was probably a bad idea. Along with the stealing. I just need help. And Artemis is like, you poor, sad little man, and actually feels bad for this idiot. So she decides to help him out. So what does she do for him? She gives him superhuman strength and speed so he could be a better hunter. She gives him fangs so that he can get blood from his prey so that he can write more poetry, because apparently she was a fan of it.
Gosh.
And she also, just happened to make him fucking immortal. So, like, she obviously made this guy way too OP. And she was like, you can only worship me now.
You gotta explain what OP means.
Overpowered. Way too overpowered. Like, he needs to get nerfed hardcore. So, She tells him, like, you can only worship
it's like
me
you're
now.
using all these terms, and you got to explain to people that don't know what these terms mean.
Nerfed means bring down the powers a little bit. So, like, if you're shooting a bullet, but you turn it into a Nerf bullet. So, she's like, you can only worship me now. And he was like, dude, deal. Because, I mean, he just got the fucking sweet end of the stick for the first time. And then she was like, also, you can't fuck anymore. I'm a virgin god. I get none, you get none. But he had already said deal. So he was fucked. I mean, like, not literally, but he was...
so he can't have sex?
No more sex. No, he's done with it. Like, if he's going to worship her, he can't have sex. But he had already agreed to it. So he writes a note for Celine, and he says, hey, meet me at the ship. She shows up, and she goes under the deck or whatever, and he's in a coffin. He's sleeping in a coffin to hide from the sun. And he has a note for her, and it gives her instructions on how to tell the crew to sail home. So they do. And they live together. Bone zone free. They stay together.
What?
And he doesn't age because Hades still has his soul, and he's going to live forever, so it doesn't even matter. And she does. So eventually when she's older, like, he presents Artemis with another offering, and Artemis comes back, and Artemis is actually pretty proud of him. Like, you hunted a lot. That's awesome. You did what I told you to, and you stayed bone zone free. So Artemis says you're allowed to touch her, but only to bite her and drink her blood.
Oh,
and
what?
It will kill her mortal body, but it will grant her immortality. And he does, and it worked. So that said, this story hits the nail way too hard on the head for me, and it feels a lot like creepypasta written in like the 1800s or the early 1900s once people had heard the vampire mythology, because this like isn't dated back to the Greek times, you know? It's like they just sort of picked the gods and decided to like toss in the characters. It's almost like historical fiction. It's like someone wrote Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, but instead it was like Apollo, god of the sun, vampire creator. And it's a little bit too on the nose for me to think that this is like 100% accurate. And on top of that, most of the stuff that was passed down before it finally got written down, it's oral. It's being passed orally. You know what I mean? And things change.
Like SDs.
Yes. I mean, they can be passed a bunch of different ways, but it's being changed as it's being passed along through the generations, you know? This is the story that places, including the History Channel, now attribute to being the earliest story of like vampirism, which I call bullshit on. But that said, some of the rules here are pretty simple. Sunlight kills vampires, silver kills vampires, but that's really about it. So let's shift out of the idea that we have to check and see where this originally came from, because we all have an idea of where this came from or what we think the rules are. And according to this story, that's probably bullshit. The rules really are just that they drink blood of people. They can die because of sunlight or because of silver. So in the late 1600s to the early to mid 1700s, there was a vampire scare. And when I say scare, I mean it was more like a panic. And a bunch of fucking people in a ton of different villages all over Europe and other places became convinced that there were actually vampires, and the vampires were all over, either causing misfortune to or killing people. And during this time, a lot of the myths regarding how to repel or kill vampires, along with vampires' supposed abilities, would come to be known. So, like, you can't see them in mirrors, or have a silver-backed mirror, and you won't be able to see it. Like, during this scare, where basically the known world that was English-speaking, plus most of, like, Eastern Europe, too, thought vampires weren't just real, but they were fucking everywhere. Like, they started thinking
weren't allowed to fuck.
I hate you. It was just the one. So, it's just... This was real, you know, this was palpable, and people were actually very, very scared. And I'd like to think that when the vampire scare was happening and everyone was just trying to figure out how to prevent it, there was just one fucking dude, and maybe it was me in a previous life, and he was like, yo, they hate garlic. And everyone just like stopped and looked at him, and he was like, they hate it. In fact, they won't come near you if you have some. They won't drink your blood if you've eaten it. We need to put a fuck ton of garlic in everything we eat. And that person... Do you think it's
because Ambrosio was Italian?
I don't know.
So it's like...
What I'm saying is that person's the real hero of this fucking story, because I'd put garlic on my cereal if I could.
Ew!
But I love garlic. But anyways, one of the stories of vampires during this era is that of a person named Petar Blagojevic. I'm pretty sure I'm pronouncing that last name correctly because it's spelled exactly like the former governor of Illinois, Rod or Rob, I forgot what his fucking first name is, Blagojevic, who was a total scumbag. So before I leave you for this episode, dear listener, I'm going to give you the true story of the, quote, vampire, Petar Blagojevic. So, Petar was a Serbian peasant who lived in a small village named Kisilova. Hope I got that right. Petar apparently did absolutely nothing worth of note in his life except die which he did in 1725. So boring life, but he died. The story that follows is an account from not only the townsfolk, but the priest of the town and the local town magistrate. And that said, it could all be bullshit, but it's documented bullshit from almost 400 years ago.
Okay.
Or I should say 300 years ago. And at the very least, the deaths told in this story are real. So following the death of Petar Blagojevic and his subsequent burial, his widow and his son would have a very eventful evening that night. The evening would kind of take a turn for the weird or the bizarre when they got a knock on their door. And the son went to the door to see who it was, and he opened it, and it was none other than Petar standing in the fucking doorway. And he, like all dead people do when they come back to life, asked for his shoes and some food. So it's like, I need my shoes and I want to eat.
Okay.
So the wife went to fetch his shoes, and the son invited him in and served him with whatever they could find in the house that he could eat. And he ate everything, getting angry and seeming to not be satisfied or satiated. And then he left their home. Just got up and fucking bolted. And then come the morning, Petar's son would not wake up. And upon closer examination, he was fucking dead.
What?
So I'm not 100% clear on the timing of this next part, but it's said that Petar's widow packed up and got the fuck out of town. I would like to think that she did it in the morning where she found her son dead and her husband returned to life the previous night. She was like, fuck this shit, I'm out. But she fucking left. She just bailed. She cited safety reasons. So in the days that would follow this incident, individuals in the town were obviously fucking terrified. Like that night, the town was on what can only really be described as high alert. And like, just take a second, let's pause it right here and try and imagine this scenario, okay? Like, imagine your life right now.
Okay.
Now take away TV, take away the internet, take away cell phones, any sort of technology that runs on electricity. Take away just about all the books you have except anything that's really cheap that you might be able to find. And then realize that you're in an era where it's about 30 years before Benjamin Franklin, quote, discovered electricity. So there's like nothing but the small town that you live in, and your life is that small town, and what you know is basically what the small town talks about, which on that day and leading into that night was that a fucking dude came back to life, was hungry and couldn't be satisfied, and that his son died the next morning. So aside from that being terrifying, one individual stated that that same night they had seen Petar walking around the town. They also complained that they were fucking exhausted like they hadn't slept the night before, and they were very pale, as if they had lost a significant amount of blood. And that individual, the next morning, was dead. So you go to bed that night, freaked out about everything that's happening, and then the person who said they saw Petar the night before and corroborated that other story winds up dead. So at this point, if you live in this village, you are just losing your fucking mind. And on top of that, another person claims to have seen Petar that night that you just slept through. And each night, one person would say they either saw Petar walking around in the town or they saw him in their room during what they could only describe as a very vivid dream. And within 24 hours, each person that said they saw him would fucking die. So,
and this is real.
This is real. So we know that this happened twice already. And I just told you that it's going to continue to happen. So you might ask, how many times, how many nights in a row are people going to see this guy and then die after they see him? 5 or 6? No. Try 9. 9 fucking people would die in consecutive nights, leaving everyone in this town to be baffled and fucking terrified. And each person who died would either before passing on, like on their deathbed, be suffering from exhaustion and loss of blood, and some claimed that they were choked by Petar at night when they saw him in the dream. And like, when they say that they were choked by him, they weren't being strangled to death, they were being assaulted on their throat. And at this point, the magistrate, which is named Frombald, and the local priest were told by the people that they needed to crack open the fucking coffin, and the two of them needed to be there. Like, they want official people from, like, the state and the church to be there with them when they're doing it, because they're not going to sit around and let more people die. And Frombald is basically like the guy who runs the town. He's like the mayor. And he was like, dude, chill the fuck out. We're not digging up someone's body, and even if we did, we need permission from the higher-ups. Like, if you're in, like, a city, you need permission from, like, the people who run the state. You know what I mean? So he's just doing things by the book, like, legitimately. And the people were like, fuck you, buddy. Like, 9...
Why do you have to say it like that?
Because I wrote it like that. But 9 people were dead. 9. So either they were going to crack open that coffin and see what the fuck was going on, or they all said that they were going to fucking abandon the town. Like, you won't have a town because we're all going to fucking leave. So they did. They cracked open this guy's fucking coffin. And Frombald approached it as rationally as possible, and he told the people if they were going to do it without permission, they would need to examine the body for signs that would indicate he was still alive and walking around at night. And he said that they needed to find things like a lack of decomposition of the body, and the things that they were looking for was hair being longer than it was before when he was buried, and nails having grown. So sure enough, they cracked open the coffin, and the priest and Frombald were the two that examined the body, and they were shocked at what they found, and they documented the following things. They documented that Peter's hair was longer than it had been when he was buried. His beard had begun to grow in, even though he was clean-shaved when they buried him. There was, quote, new skin and nails, and most eerily, blood could be seen at the corners of his mouth and inside his mouth as well. So while examining Peter, the people notice what's happening. They're hearing the things that they're seeing, and they're getting really upset. So I imagine it's a crowd like in South Park, where they're like, rabble, 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 rabble. So they're all getting super fucking agitated, and eventually a member of the crowd proceeded to get up and go to the coffin and take a wooden stake and stab Peter Blagojevich in the fucking heart. I mean, the dude's dead, supposedly, so he just stabs him in the fucking heart. So it can't be murder. And it was said to cause a great deal of, quote, completely fresh blood to flow through the ears and mouth of Peter Blagojevich. And to be sure they had done the job, the crowd then took the body and burned it.
Wow.
And the funniest part of all of this is Frombald, the guy who's the magistrate or mayor or whatever, he had to write a report on the incident. And this report is real, and it's documented. And he had to write the report and send it to his higher-ups that he was supposed to get permission from in the first place. In his report, he asked that in the event they ruled that he and the villagers had actually done something wrong, he not be blamed for it because the fucking people were, quote, beside themselves with fear. So it's like, it's not my fault they made me do it.
Yeah.
If you guys are mad about it, be mad at them and not me. There were no repercussions for the event, and the mysterious deaths and sightings of Peter Blagojevich all stopped after that night.
That's crazy.
No one died after that night. I mean, eventually people die, but not like from those, those circumstances. And Blagojevich's sightings completely stopped. So the report on this event that was written was printed in multiple locations locally at first. So it's like the 1700s and people are picking up on a news story and running it. And eventually it got picked up and started spreading like wildfire throughout not only Europe, but America as well. And this would directly fan the flames of the vampire scare in places like Germany, France, and England. And what's incredible about this story is that the details from this story were so terrifying to people that were already scared of vampires. They started attaching pieces of the vampire mythology to this particular incident. In particular, you need a wooden stake to be driven through a vampire's heart to kill it.
And you have to set it on fire.
The setting on fire thing, I'm sure, worked into it too. And as a side note, all the things that they found on the body are things that happen naturally during decomposition.
Yeah.
So they say that hair
like
and
the skin pulling back.
Hair and nails can grow slightly after death, and although they usually appear to have grown a lot due to, like she said, skin receding. So like your cuticles and your scalp and your skin tightens up because the moisture leaves your body. So whatever was underneath your skin, like imagine like if you have a beard or a mustache or hair or whatever, how there's like skin underneath it, or there's hair underneath that. When your skin shrinks, like that appears to have grown out, but really your skin's just receded back from it. So they found all these things, and like if you're not being like embalmed or taken care of like in the ways that we do it now, obviously people would think that blood in the mouth or around the corners of your mouth is something like not natural, but it is. It's totally natural. So Peter Blagojevich's appearance, though, is like completely unexplainable. And the sightings aren't explained, and the 9 deaths following Peter's death, one each night, is not explained. And it's possible there was some sickness that just hit the group that hit the town in particular. And Peter was the first one to die from it. But the sightings and the fear of the town can only be chalked up to one explainable phenomenon, and that is mass hysteria. And the idea that there was a group of people who fed off of each other's fears, and on top of that had 9 consecutive deaths in 9 consecutive nights to fuel their panic, or the possibility that there was actually a guy who came back to life and was somehow associated with these fucking deaths. Or, and I had this theory when I was writing it, he had a twin that showed up after he died and just was like, I'm going to fucking freak people out. Check this shit out. And people were dying from fear. but no one knows for sure. But that is the true story of the, quote, vampire, Petar Blagojevich. So I think what you'll find with this myth is that there's a lot of different, like, quote-unquote vampires throughout history, and most of them have circumstances after their death where they're either seen or they're thought to be seen that either bring misfortune or people die. And depending on what weird circumstances happen during it or happen during, like, the vanquishing of the vampire, it all starts getting rolled into this ball, like this snowball rolling down a mountain, and that becomes part of, like, the whole vampire mythology. So there's another story that I didn't do that I'll eventually get to, but it's about a Croatian vampire in the late 1600s. It happened before this one. And one of the details I remember from it is that they didn't kill him, they just chased him off. And the person who chased him off was a priest, and his only weapon was a crucifix. So he chased him out by praying and holding the cross at him, and that's where the thought that they're actually afraid of crosses came from.
Okay.
And that was the first known event of someone being called a vampire in any native tongue. I think because it was Croatian, it was like Striga or something close to that.
Yeah.
But yeah, like this is a very interesting myth that has taken on a life of its own for a very, very long time. And now at this point in like society or in all the civilizations that exist around the world, since we're all connected now, they're basically like pop culture icons.
Yeah.
And I just think it's hilarious that it's like, I won't say spun out of control, but it's grown so ridiculous because let's say there actually are vampires. They are safer and more hidden now than they will ever be because of the false exposure they've gotten through stuff like novels or comic books or TV or movies or anything that turns them into something that's a work of fiction. And like a lot of the things about the show True Blood, the way it deals with like vampire powers, I did not like. But one of the things that I found most interesting when we were watching the show is that at one point, one of the main characters, Bill, says,
Suki.
I hate you so much. He says that part of the reason that vampires have been able to hide so well is because they just embraced society. And when they did so, they were able to create myths to people who were not educated that would disprove the fact that they're vampires. Like, you can't see me in a mirror. You can't see a vampire in a mirror, and you're a vampire. And then they look in the mirror and they see you. Like, oh, not a vampire. But people keep dying all around you. You know what I mean? It's like, How hard would it be if you're a human being and you get turned into a vampire, and your life is pretty much the same, except that you have to, feed off of people, only exist at night, and hide what you really are. You still are going to have the ability to just fucking lie to people and manipulate crowds of people into thinking like, oh, I'm not what I really think I am, How hard would it be for people who have this like underground society to just gaslight a group of fucking morons who are controlled through fear? So it was just a really unique thought that I had for the first time thinking about this myth is like the false exposure of this being fiction would be the safe haven there could be, the biggest safe haven there could be for actual vampires. If
I
they
love
existed.
vampire books.
I really like
love
the
them.
myth of vampires, but I have like my own rule set in my head, and I think most people do. Like I believe like the sun kills them. I believe silver is like painful to them. I like the idea of the wooden stake, even though it makes no sense. Garlic to me doesn't sound like it would work, but it's like there's so many different things I've seen, like Blade tries to kind of like touch on like the scientific aspects behind it, like the first one. I haven't seen the second one in a long time. I've never seen the third one, But like every time I watch a vampire show, the first thing that pops into my head is like, I want to know who the oldest vampire is. I want to know who the first vampire is.
Yeah.
So digging into this, like you can find different things. Like I found something that said like the Bible references vampires, and they showed the passage, and it doesn't. It just references like a creature, and it doesn't even say like that it drinks blood or anything like that.
Lame.
And then people say there's a bunch of different characters throughout the Bible that could have been vampires, and like all these TV shows have done it. Like True Blood has Lilith as the first vampire, which is like the first creature created to be partners with Adam. And it wasn't exactly like Adam, so Adam was afraid of it, and that became a vampire in certain like lore. And then like something crappy like Dracula 2000 you brought up. You know who Dracula was in that?
Mm-mm.
Judas from the Bible. You know how you kill Judas or Dracula in that movie?
What?
You hang him. And it's just like, it's so lame, but at the same time, like each thing that tries to attach itself to a different piece of like actual religion or actual mythology is going to change the fucking rules a little bit.
So weird.
Everyone has their own rules for something like this, which is why it's so hard to nail down like what the actual rules would be. So I'm just saying, if a vampire exists and listens to our podcast, thank you, and send us an email to storytime@scarish.com. And you don't have to tell us all the things that kill you, because I really don't want to know that, because I don't want to kill a vampire. I'm just very curious to know like all the other things, like can we see you in mirrors? Do you get to eat garlic? Because that would be the worst part about it. I wouldn't miss the sun as much as I'd miss garlic in my fucking food.
Yeah.
Just drive me crazy. You can smell it, though.
Dude, I want Alfredo right now.
I know. And I mean, imagine
pesto.
being a vampire and you can't do that.
Pesto.
So, and if you can like eat garlic, do you still get to taste? I have so many questions if there's a vampire out there. Don't come here. That's okay. Like, I don't need to hang out with you. Like, I'm still kind of like weary of that, or wary of that, whichever one it actually is. But just email us, storytime@scarish.com. So, yeah.
Okay. Anything else?
No, I think that's just about it for this episode of.
All right.
I was gonna say of Storytime, but this episode is Scarish.
Cool. Keep in mind, guys, don't forget that we do have a Patreon, patreon.com/scarishpodcast. Please support us. It helps us out a lot. We are still trying to upgrade our video studio setup for live broadcasts. So if you go to ko-fi.com/scarishpodcast, those are one-time donations. Donate whatever you want. But it helps us kind of upgrade our video situation, our lights and stuff like that. Because
we're going to upgrade everything that we can as soon as we can. I know this Saturday we tried to stream Robin and I playing Dead by Daylight. We actually downloaded that, what do you call it, Humble Bundle, which was only $15 for each of us. We both got Friday the 13th and BioShock and Dead by Daylight and a handful of other games too. But streaming it didn't work out that well, so I think what we're going to do if we play Dead by Daylight together again, because I'll probably play it alone. I know it's not Robin's cup of tea, but it'll be one of those like game days that we can now do. So if anyone's interested in playing with us, you can always just go ahead and pick up that Humble Bundle. We don't advertise for them. We're just a big fan of theirs.
Yeah.
Rather than buying the game separately, I think like Dead by Daylight's $30 on its own.
Yeah,
so,
Humble Bundle's just really cool because I love donating to charities.
Yeah, and you can actually set up on there when you buy it, how much you want to go to the game developer, how much you want to go to Humble Bundle, the site, and how much you want to go to that charity. So it's really cool that you can adjust that.
It's really neat. Oh, and there's going to be a giveaway when we get to 500 likes on Facebook.
Which we're right there.
Yeah, we're right
almost there.
So getting super close. I think that's it, right?
Yeah, I'll just do the normal sign-up stuff. Like, if you want to reach out to us, storytime@scarish.com is our email. Facebook.com/scarishpodcast is our Facebook page. You can join the group there. You can join the Discord there. Post there. Message us however you're most comfortable contacting us. If you want to check us out on Twitter, it's @ScarishPod. And like Robin said, patreon.com/scarishpodcast is our Patreon. Ko-fi.com/scarishpodcast is our Ko-fi.
Check out scarish.com, our actual website. We post all our episodes there. We post stuff that I like right now.
I think we're going to, I won't say rework, but just add to the section where it's like, I know that we have a wish list up there that I haven't added anything onto, but I want to have a section where Robin can post the stuff that she likes, I can post the stuff that I like, so you guys can see the stuff we use. And on top of that, we can post stuff that is on our wish list or things that I'm looking into getting in the future.
Yeah, because those are our affiliate links, too. So if you buy anything off there, it also helps support us.
Yeah, and it's the same exact price for you, but at the same time, if it's going through all these different sites, I think we're going to have a lot of them coming up, too, for all the stuff that we do use. We'll have links there that you guys can purchase stuff, and that'll give us a little bit of credit, too. So it's all good stuff. We appreciate everything that you guys do for us. We check out the iTunes store at least once a week to see if we've gotten new reviews. And when you guys leave those, they're almost always so nice.
They're so nice.
And we appreciate the feedback. It's so nice to get.
Yeah.
So thank you guys who've done that. And to those of you who are thinking about doing it, it's something super quick you can do on iTunes. And it really, really does help the podcast out. So we appreciate all of you guys. So thank you for listening one last time. And I think that's just about everything.
Yeah. Keep on creeping on, and we'll talk to you guys next week.